Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell. At the end of a historically volatile day of trading on Wall Street, it has been a wild ride with huge swings in both directions after stocks plummeted last week. The Dow alone experienced a 2,600-point swing today, its biggest ever, finally ending the day down more than 300 points. The S&P 500 at one point today hit what traders call a bear market, down 20% off recent highs. This is a time lapse of trading today, as investors seem to be hanging on every word and every tea leaf from the president and the White House, with tariffs at levels not seen in 100-plus years about to go into effect, and conflicting messages about potential off-ramps, negotiations, or even more tariffs. The president today threatening to impose an additional 50% levy on imports from China unless it rescinds its retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. The president also holding a meeting with his close ally, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, after earlier today touting on social media the possibility of, quote, negotiations with other countries on tariffs. Now, despite some White House officials saying just the opposite. Moments ago, President Trump told reporters that he is not considering a short-term pause on the new tariffs, but that he is willing to be engaged in negotiations.
We have many countries that are coming to negotiate deals with us, and they're going to be fair deals. And in certain cases, they're going to be paying substantial tariffs. There'll be fair deals. We're going to have one shot at this. And no other president's going to do this, what I'm doing. We'll be talking to China. We'll be talking to a lot of different countries. And I think, you know, if we can make a really fair deal and a good deal for the United States, not a good deal for others. This is America first. It's now America first. We're going to get fair deals and good deals with every country. And if we don't, we're going to have nothing to do with them. They're not going to be allowed to participate in the United States.
And I'm joined now by Bob Pisani, senior markets correspondent for CNBC, NBC News senior White House correspondent, my good friend Gabe Gutierrez, and NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung. Guys, I am still buckled up from this wild ride today. And Bob, let me start with you. We saw a little bit of leveling off. Should we see that as a good sign?
Yes, we should. As you said, this was an absolutely wild ride. It was actually a 2,700-point swing, Kelly. That's about 7%. That's almost unprecedented on an intraday basis. So the market seems to be trying to figure out where there is a bottom in this endless tariff war that is going on here. And what it saw today, number one, was the market was very oversold after days and days of selling. But secondly, some hope that the idea of negotiations to lower the tariffs were still alive. The president's advisors say we're not negotiating, but the president, as you saw in that quote from him, clearly indicated that he was open to negotiations. That's what's giving the market some hope here. Now, other stocks, though, had a tough time. Most tech stocks were up, but Apple, if you'll notice, was down 4% today. That's because the iPhone is designed in California, but manufactured in China, and the tariffs there would massively increase the cost of an iPhone. So Apple's been under a lot of pressure for the last several days, and again, down 4% today, Kelly.
And a lot of consumers know a lot about Apple. Now, we saw something interesting happen today. There was a sudden spike in the market for about 5 minutes this morning. And what we learned is there was some incorrect reporting that President Trump was considering a 90-day pause. There was a social media post about that. Does that speak to the volatility we're seeing right now, that something posted on the internet could cause markets to react so quickly?
Yes. Well, number one, the markets, again, oversold. It was a coiled spring. It was looking for any kind of reason to bounce at this point. And, of course, you mentioned that erroneous report here, but it spoke to the heart of what the market wanted to hear, even if it was erroneous, which is that there is some hope for either a pause or some kind of negotiation. As you saw there, the president clearly indicated that he was open to some kind of negotiation. So while that particular report was erroneous, the general thrust of it, where the market wanted to go, which is we want negotiations to keep the tariffs down to reduce the economic chaos, that hope still very much alive.
So interesting. The president is saying he doesn't want to put a pause on things, but did give investors and maybe people who are on the edge of retirement maybe a little reason to breathe if he's willing to do some negotiating. We also saw today something called the volatility index, and that is reaching a crisis level. And obviously that makes people worried, especially those who are concerned about do they have time left. So tell us more about what that is and how concerned investors ought to be.
The volatility index, we call it the VIX on Wall Street, is a measure of short-term volatility in the stock market. It looks at what traders think might be happening 30 days out. How much volatility, how much movement in the stock market are we expecting? And right now, the volatility index, the VIX, is very, very high. That means that traders are at least short-term expecting a lot of movement in the market. I think that will calm down if we get a little more certainty on the tariff situation. As for what people should be doing, long-term, investors, it's very, very clear. Most investors should be doing absolutely nothing. Have a long-term plan, stay invested in the market. This is what the professionals tell you. Remember something, Kelly, it's not a loss until you actually sell. That's an old saw on Wall Street. It sounds trite, but it's true. Back to you.
Well, I'll take that advice as well and ease up a little bit myself. Let me turn now to Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, what can you tell us? Do we have any more clarity now on what the president is thinking in terms of negotiating? Is he open to that? And what are you sensing is his first target?
Hi there, Kelly. Well, we had been talking about for several days now this mixed messaging coming out of the White House. You mentioned it, that several White House aides had said that this was not a negotiation, as you've been discussing, whereas the president made it seem like it was. Today, he was asked about that, actually, just a short time ago here in the Oval Office during a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said both could be true, essentially trying to have it both ways, saying that it is his plan to have countries come to the United States and negotiate, however, that these tariffs will be permanent, and that this is something he's been discussing for decades, even before he became a politician. And it seems like, Kelly, that he does want to keep that baseline, that 10% baseline that all countries have been slapped with this tariff. But there may be some negotiation in some of the more stringent tariffs. We've been now hearing from the European Union, for example, that today is talking about potentially slashing tariffs on American-made cars and industrial products. The president seeming to suggest that that was a step in the right direction, but that they'll have to do more. So President Trump really doubling down on that idea of negotiating for a better deal, Kelly.
Yeah, you call this a one-shot deal for the country. Do you get a sense that the White House is looking for a long-term way to sell these tariffs to the public?
Well, at this point, they are just, they view this as a promise kept, it's a campaign promise, and they really are trying to hit that message that this will be for the good of the country long term. The president keeps using that metaphor that this was a sick patient and that there was an operation, and now that the operation is over, trying to extend that metaphor over the last several days, even as he was in Florida at his golf club. But Kelly, the White House really thinks that once these tariffs are in place and once the stock market, or if the stock market rebounds, that he will essentially be proven right. Of course, that remains to be seen. So much volatility today. Even there was a lot of back and forth today here at the White House because we were expecting a full press conference from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. That was scrapped in favor of a meeting inside the Oval Office where he just is wrapping up taking questions. So a lot of changes here at the White House as we continue to watch these markets.
And you and I both know a press conference has a different sort of level of stature than sitting with a friendly ally and taking questions. And optics play into a lot of this. And we were looking also at not just what's happening in the stagecraft of the White House, but how the president spent part of his weekend. He was playing golf. And many Americans were worried about their finances. Do you get a sense that the White House has any concerns about that comparison?
No, at least not yet, Kelly. And I've been speaking with White House officials today. They stress, as they have often before, that the president can be at his golf club, can be playing golf, and he's still speaking with world leaders. That's something that they insist upon. And really, they almost seem to be defiant in the face of such criticism over the weekend. It was the president's own account on his True Social platform that posted that video of him taking his golf swing. The White House itself told the press pool that he had won his round and was on his way to the championship. And even yesterday, the president speaking with reporters brought it up again that he had done well in his golf game this weekend. So the White House is, again, defiant, and they feel that once these tariffs are in place and, once they see that the Economist, they try to prove the Economist wrong, they feel that the American public will stick with them.
Leaning into that golf swing for sure. Thank you, Gabe. Good to be with you. And I'm going to turn now to Brian. And President Trump is threatening an additional 50% tariff on China. So when you think of all the goods that come from China into the United States, our consumer culture, what do you think the impact of those tariffs would be if they do, in fact, go into effect as early as later this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be wide-ranging and cover basically all the types of products that we're used to buying on a daily basis when you consider things like clothes, when you consider things like electronics that we, in most cases, or in some cases with those industries, we import almost entirely from China. So one example would be laptops, computers, smartphones, and you have the Consumer Technology Association warning that specifically ratcheting up rates on China to the degree of the 54-60% that, we had heard on the campaign trail and are actually being put into effect effective Wednesday could raise the cost of those items that I just mentioned by $200 to $300 per unit. But I want to point out that the ratcheting up even further from here, based off of that Truth Social post that we had seen earlier today, where the president said that unless China were to cancel their 34% retaliatory tariff that they proposed last week, then they would raise it by another 50%. Our Catherine Doyle here at NBC News confirmed that that would stack on top of what was already the original plan, which would take the effective tariff rate from 54% to 104%. I haven't even seen projections of what that would do to consumer prices, but it would only go up. You couldn't imagine a scenario where prices would go down.
I'm going to need my calculator now, Brian, after all of that. We've been following closely what different officials are saying, and one of the people that we look to with great interest is the Treasury Secretary. Scott Bessent told Kristen yesterday on Meet the Press that a recession is not avoidable. Let's look at that.
I reject the assumption. There doesn't have to be a recession. Who knows how the market is going to react in a day, in a week. What we are looking at is building the long-term economic fundamentals for prosperity that I think the previous administration had put us on a course toward financial calamity. This is an adjustment process. We saw with President Reagan when he brought down the great inflation and we got past the Carter malaise that there was some choppiness at that time, but he held the course, and we're going to hold the course. And this has been years in the building, years in the making.
Obviously, he is defending his boss, but what's your reaction to the substance of what he had to say?
Yeah, well, let's start off with the back part of that bite that we just heard from about this being an adjustment process, that this is years in the making, and it will be years in the making, even if, let's say, for example, companies are convinced that with these tariff policies in effect, especially if they believe that these tariffs are for real and will be in place for years to come, that, okay, we'll reshore some of this manufacturing, open up a factory in Omaha, Nebraska, and then try to find the laborers to build that factory and then produce T-shirts or smartphones here in the United States. Well, the problem is that, first off, you need the billions of dollars to do that. Then you might need years, in some cases even decades, to make that process happen. Now, the first part of it is whether or not we will go into a recession. The secretary is suggesting that doesn't have to be the case, but you have these projections that as soon as this year, there's a likelihood that the United States could go into a recession. That coming from JP Morgan, well, then you do wonder that's the trade-off. In the short term, a recession, if it means the onshoring of those businesses over the long term. But again, that's a real big gamble that I think most business leaders would probably not want to take.
And, Brian, we will count on you to keep us up to date on all of this. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And now I'm joined by Diane Swonk, chief economist for KPMG. And good to have you with us today. I know you've been tracking all of this closely. What is your concern this afternoon as we sit here? We've heard new things from the president. We see how the market has been reacting. When you're considering tariffs, inflation, recession, or even stagflation, what stands out to you today?
We're still on a course to endure some bout of stagflation, and barring a major pullback on the tariffs that were announced on April 2nd, we will likely go into a recession. And the hard part about it for the Federal Reserve, and this is something the chairman of the Fed has already made very clear, is that in a stagflationary scenario, that's when inflation is picking up along with unemployment, the Fed has to be very careful about not cutting too quickly. They remember the lessons of the 1970s, and not to correct the Treasury Secretary, but in fact, it was the Volcker recessions that brought down inflation in the early 1980s, and it was in part some interference by the Nixon administration that caused the stagflation of the 1970s. So I think it's very important the Fed has learned those lessons. They know from that period that if you, with the embers of inflation still smoldering, if you cut rates too soon, you could get a more pernicious bout of inflation. So that's not what they're ready to do. That said, we know that the size of tariffs, even if they're scaled back a bit, these are extremely high tariffs, and it's both, going to force layoffs and some pass through onto consumers. Yes. That's the very definition of stagflation.
And the historical note you made there about the Nixon era, and of course we see the president now has been putting some public pressure on the Fed to act. Do you see a point where these tariffs could cause real long-term economic damage, either here in the U.S. or globally?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the issues is that once you get into trade war, they're very hard to de-escalate. We still have a window to de-escalate now and pull back. But once you start to get into a trade war, as you already heard the president saying, listen, we're going to double down on China for retaliating on us. That is the kind of thing that you see. Now, the worst case of that, of course, was the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930, which were invoked well into the Great Depression, and that caused a trade war. It was tariffs against 20,000 products in 25 countries, a trade war, hot war with 10 countries that sowed the seeds of World War II. That is not a place we want to go.
Do you see de-escalation and negotiation in the same sentence?
It would be hopeful, but that would then undermine what the president has said their other goals are, and that is to incentivize onshoring, to eliminate the trade deficit, and to generate revenues to offset the expansions and extensions to tax cuts that they'd like to do for 2026. And so, it can't be all those things at once, and this is being used as a silver bullet when it's little more than a blunt tool.
Well, thank you for keeping us straight on that. It's so helpful, and your expertise is really needed in a moment like that. So thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.